Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is May 13th, and there are just 38 days until the first day of summer. Today we celebrate a garden that transformed into a cemetery for our country's military. And we'll also learn about one of America's oldest gardens. It opened on this day over 100 years ago. We'll hear an excerpt from one of the founders of the Garden Club of America about rescuing her family daffodils. And we grow that garden library with a book about the perfect plant partners in the garden. And then we'll wrap things up with the writer Daphne du Maurier. She loved gardens and she incorporated them into her stories. But first, here's today's curated news. Today's curated news comes to us from food52.com. This is an article that was written by Nadia Hassani, and the title caught my attention. It actually caught my mom's attention because she forwarded this to me, but I absolutely loved it. It was called The Essential Gardening Step You're Probably Skipping. Well, if somebody tells me I'm skipping a step in the garden, you can bet your bottom dollar I'm going to be reading whatever it is they're recommending. And in this case, it turns out that a garden journal is your most valuable tool. Well, if you're like me, you've been keeping a garden journal for a very long time. And if you're not, you should definitely give it a try. And Nadia makes the case for creating a garden journal and keeping one, keeping track of all the details of your garden, from the plants that you're putting in your garden to the chores that you want to get accomplished to perhaps even the contractors that you have helping you with work in your garden. You know, when I returned from the cabin last week, I got into my office here and I started cleaning things out, doing a little spring cleaning, but also getting established back here at home in Maple Grove. And one of the things I came across were my garden journals. I used to keep them by year, and so I have this wonderful set of journals from 2010 to 2018, and I had a blast the other day just going through those. And I tell you what, I think sometimes as gardeners, we can be a little bit hard on ourselves, thinking that we don't know enough or that we just haven't reached the level of mastery that we're wanting to attain. But if you keep a garden journal and you look back, I think you'll be surprised at just how much you've grown when it comes to your skill level as a gardener. I know for myself, I was really surprised. I was actually laughing at some of the things that I was very enamored with. Back in 2010, when I had a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old, I didn't have a lot of time, but boy, did I have a lot of big dreams for my garden. And now in the fullness of time, I can look back and really see how some of those ideas or concepts that I was hoping for in my garden were really ill-conceived. And then some of the things that I was really confused about or just lacked confidence in, I've definitely acquired more mastery. And so it was just a fun trip down memory lane to see where I was as a gardener and also to see those wonderful old pictures of my garden. So, full circle moment here. If you would like to read this article by Nadia Hassani, just search for the word journal in the Facebook group for the show. And to do that, you just head on up to the little magnifying glass that's at the top of the group, and then this post will pop right up. It's a quick little read, and it's a great little reminder to go out and get yourself a pretty little notebook that you can use as your journal for your 2021 garden. And of course, if you're not in the Facebook group, please know that you have a standing invitation. You can join at any time. All you need to do is head on up to the search bar where you'd search for an old friend and type in the words Daily Gardener Community and then request to join. I'd love to see you in the group. It's time for today's botanical history. Here's botanical history for today, May 13th. It was on this day, May 13th, in 1864, that Private William Christman became the first person to be buried at Arlington Cemetery. Arlington National Cemetery didn't start out as a cemetery. It was actually a property that belonged to the Custis family, the family of George Washington Parke Custis, the adopted son of the first president of the United States. His biological mother was Martha Washington. Now, today, many people are unaware of the ties between the Custis family and the Lee family. It turns out that George's daughter, Mary, married Robert E. Lee, and when George died, Robert inherited Arlington House, a place that his wife Mary loved dearly. As many visitors to Washington, D.C. can attest, Arlington House was situated on a grand hill, and it overlooked 1,100 acres of land. When the Civil War started, Robert and Mary Lee abandoned the property. And since the Lees didn't dare return to the city to pay taxes on the property for fear of being arrested, they sacrificed Arlington House to the north. Now, once they were gone, Union soldiers immediately took occupancy, and they set up camp on the advantageous position that was afforded them by the hill. The burial of William Christman on a remote corner of the property on this day in 1864 marked the beginning of a new chapter for Arlington. It was becoming a graveyard for fallen Union soldiers. Soon, the higher-ranking soldiers and officers were being buried closer to the mansion, around what was left of the Lee family garden, where Mary had tended roses, honeysuckle, and jasmine. Today, there are over 400,000 graves at Arlington. And it was on this day, 110 years ago, on May 13th in 1911, that the Brooklyn Botanic Garden in New York City opened to the public. Today, the garden is home to over 200 cherry trees, representing 42 different species. And the garden is made up of a number of defined garden spaces. First, the Japanese Hill and Pond Garden was one of the first Japanese gardens to be created in an American botanic garden, and it was also the first Japanese garden to be accessible free of charge in the United States. Second, the Cranford Rose Garden came to be after being sponsored by the engineering company executive Walter V. Cranford. Now, the oldest garden on the property is the Native Flora Garden, which started out as a wildflower garden before transitioning to a woodland garden. There's also a Shakespeare garden, a fragrance garden, and a children's garden. Now, before the pandemic, the garden welcomed nearly 1 million visitors every single year. It's time for today's Unearthed Words. Today's unearthed words come to us from the American author, amateur gardener, and founding member of the Garden Club of America, Helena Rutherford Ely. This is her little story about going back to her family place and digging up her family's daffodil bulbs. Narcissi and daffodils live for generations. I know some double yellow daffodils growing in my great-grandfather's garden that were planted over 70 years ago. The place was sold and the house burned about 30 years since, and all this time has been entirely neglected. Someone told me that daffodils and narcissi still bloomed there bravely in the grass. With a cousin, one lovely day last spring, I took the train out to this old place and there found quantities of the dainty yellow flowers. We had come unprovided with any garden implements, having nothing of the kind in town, and brought only a basket for the spoils and a steel table knife. We quickly found the knife of no avail, so borrowed a sadly broken coal shovel from a tumble-down sort of man who stood gazing at us from the door of a tumble-down house. The daffodil roots were nearly a foot deep, but we finally got them, several hundreds of them, all we could carry. The driver seemed to think us somewhat mad, but when I told him that the original bulbs from which all these had come were planted by my great-grandmother and her daughter, and that I wanted to carry some away to plant in my own garden, he became interested and dug with all his heart. The bulbs were in solid clumps a foot across and had to be pulled apart and separated. They were the old double yellow daffodil and a very large double white variety, the edges of the petals faintly tinged with yellow and delightfully fragrant. My share of the spoils is now thriving in my garden. By the process of division every 3 years, these daffodils can be made to yield indefinitely, and perhaps some great-grandchild of my own may gather their blossoms. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Natural Companions by Ken Drews. This book came out in 2012, and the subtitle is The Garden Lover's Guide to Plant Combinations. In this book, plantsman and garden writer Ken Drews presents his time-tested recipes for plant pairings. Some plants are beautiful all on their own, but some really shine when set beside another plant. Plant pairings are also a wonderful way to complement bloom times or foliage. Ken smartly organizes his book by theme within seasons. He covers color, fragrance, foliage, grasses, and edible flowers, just to name a few. And like all of Ken's books, this book is filled with a ton of horticultural wisdom and guidance, in addition to garden lore, humor, and practicality. This book is 256 pages of perfect plant partners for your garden. You can get a copy of Natural Companions by Ken Drews and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $4. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the English author and playwright Daphne du Maurier, who was born in London on this day, May 13th, in 1907. Daphne was the middle daughter of a well-to-do family of creative bohemian artists and writers. Her father was a famous actor and a favorite of James Barrie, the author of Peter Pan. Daphne's writing inspired Alfred Hitchcock, especially her novels Rebecca, Jamaica Inn, and her short story, The Birds. In 1938, Daphne published her popular book, Rebecca. It has never gone out of print. And during the pandemic in 2020, Netflix released their own movie version of Rebecca. It starred Lily James from Downton Abbey, Armie Hammer, and Kristen Scott Thomas. Now, in her book, Rebecca, Daphne writes about the beautiful azaleas that grew on the estate at Manderley. And she tells us that the blooms were used to make a perfume for its late mistress. Yet most azalea growers know that this is likely an example of artistic license, since most evergreen azaleas have little to no fragrance. That said, some native deciduous azaleas can be very fragrant. In the opening pages of Rebecca, Daphne's narrator vividly describes the wild and woolly garden of Manderley. She says, "I saw that the garden had obeyed the jungle law, even as the woods had done. The rhododendrons stood 50 feet high, twisted and entwined with bracken, and they had entered into alien marriage with a host of nameless shrubs, poor things, that clung about their roots as though conscious of their spurious origin. A lilac had mated with a copper beech, and to bind them yet more closely to one another, the malevolent ivy, always an enemy to grace, had thrown her tendrils about the pair and made them prisoners." Daphne du Maurier incorporated gardens into many of her books. Her daughters recall that their mother loved flowers and flower arranging. Their home was always filled with flowers. Daphne's love of flowers and gardens can be seen in her books. She often makes the garden a safe place. In Echoes from the Macabre selected stories, Daphne wrote, "As soon as he had disappeared, Deborah made for the trees. The woods were made for secrecy. They did not recognize her, as the garden did." Now, Daphne would sometimes write about the garden as a dangerous place. Here's an example from The King's General. "I was a tiny child at Radford, my uncle's home, and he was walking me through the glass houses in the gardens. There was one flower, an orchid, that grew alone. It was the color of pale ivory, with one little vein of crimson running through the petals. The scent filled the house, and swiftly my uncle pulled me by the shoulder. 'Don't touch it, child. The stem is poisonous.'" Finally, in Daphne's work, The Parasites, she shows a different side of herself, her cleverness and humor, with a brief commentary on what it was like sending flowers along with a telegram. Daphne wrote, "Most people would send their letters and telegrams to the Haymarket, the flowers too. When you came to think of it, the whole business was horribly like having an operation. The telegrams, the flowers, and the long hours of waiting." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove and Wyoming, Minnesota. If you want to read today's show notes, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. And don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can always get in touch by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.